the first obvious one really is tell us about when you first knew about Alan Davie and perhaps when you first met him.
Right. It was in 1956 that I first met him. He came to Leeds University as a Gregory Fellow of Painting. This was a sinecure, I suppose, and he followed that of Terry Frost. I had just come to terms with the structural abstract painting of Terry Frost, which then was quite daring abstraction in those days. Alan Davie's work, when I first saw it, I couldn't deal with it at all because it seemed absolutely formless, chaotic, messy. And it took me a long time to realize that it was the way that Davie worked that was really the secret of his genius, I suppose, in that he was really overthrowing conventional ways of working because he believed in the inner creativity. So instead of starting out with an idea in his head and doing something, what he was really doing was the act of painting and discovering what happened during that act of painting.
Yes.
And that was the revolutionary thing. You know, we talk about, what's his name? Jackson Pollock.
Yes.
It's of the same era. Well, can you imagine what it was like 60 years ago? You know, I was flummoxed, and then, having been hostile towards it, I then became a complete convert, and that's when I bought Blood Creation, which is a huge work, a complex work. And
can I just ask, because obviously with the fellowship, my understanding is it's like a full-blown residency, or it was like a residency.
Quite right.
The artists were living there, and obviously there were exhibitions, and did you see his work in progress at that time?
Yes.
Did you visit the studio that he was in?
I did, and I went there and I did not talk about his art because I couldn't come to terms with it. But I talked to him about anything else, jazz, Buddhism, you name it. But all the time, these works were blazing down from their walls, and eventually they got to me. So it wasn't so much me bottoming them, they came to me. It was
right.
that kind of conversion.
And were you in the habit of going to see the Gregory Fellowship
Yes.
artists at that time?
This was a pioneering venture by a chap called Peter Gregory, who decided to endow scholarships in painting, poetry and sculpture to Leeds University, the idea being they had a roof over their heads, modest stipend, and otherwise no obligations at all. In fact, of course, they fully came into the life of the city, which then was burgeoning post-war. And it was a very exciting time to be there. And I was a beneficiary, as an outsider, I've always been an outsider to Leeds, of these amazing artists who came. Because Peter Gregory, this is very important to know, he was obviously the philanthropist, but he didn't necessarily think that his judgment as to who should be the most suitable candidates for the fellowships, that he could make it on his own. So what did he do? T.S. Eliot, Barnaby Dobre, Herbert Reed were all involved.
So very prestigious.
In recommending. And that's why, if you look at the history of those early times, 50s and 60s, most of those artists, in the broadest sense, poets as well as sculptors, became national, international figures. That's the potted history, from my point of view, of the Gregory Fellowship.
I'd like to come back to the purchase of the first work in a moment, but how did, you've said something about how his work struck you. What were you actually looking at? Was he working on the floor? Was he working on sort of large canvases? What did you see in the space that he was working?
He did do both of that. But when I first met him, he had torn, roughly torn, very coarse sheets of wrapping paper, laid them down in rows on the floor. Around the room there were pots of paint, each made by him, and all single colours. And you come along, take a brush, and go to each of the, what we'll call them 20 sheets, and paint a single, simple geometric shape in them. Then he would take another brush, different colour, and make another geometric shaped mark, possibly close to the one he'd just done, and so on, with different colours. Well, until most of the surface of the paper was covered. While he was doing that, which was all very easily done, the painting from one to another had cousinly resemblances, but they were certainly not copies of each other. So you ended up with fairly disparate ones, but they're all recognisable as the same series. But only then did the magic begin, because he then laid down these big brushes and took up two small ones, one black, one white. And the magic began when he stooped over each of these sheets in turn. And whatever suggested itself to him, he did. So that the small brushes were used to overlay, interlace, join, disjoin, and all that. It was an absolutely magic thing that happened, and you saw it happening before your eyes. So the resultant pictures had the absolute individuality, and the one you've seen, which was, as I say, I was present when he was doing it, and which I bought, wet, then, has been with me ever since. And it was that really got me over this difficult hump then, because it took over half a century ago.
How could you ask? What did he? Did you have a conversation with him at that time about where these works were derived from, what his thinking was?
Oh yes, very much so. And he would say, I mean, one of the great things about Alan was that it was so much an automatic process, given that he had committed himself to a painting, that he didn't really know what was going to happen. And he would say to me, well, you have to take advantage of what happens. That's the one thing. And the other thing he would say is, so much good painting gets lost in the process. And it was nothing for him to look at a completed painting and marvel at what he found.
Right.
That to me was quite something. Because in a real sense he didn't know. But because he was an artist, this is the magic thing. I mean, I was so flummoxed by all this to begin with, that I thought, well, how could it be? So I in fact got my own paints and tore strips of paper and got to it on the attic floor. What I produced were not works of art, because when it came to the magic bit, I was lost.
So obviously you're intrigued by this and drawn in.
I was.
And so you were you visiting him on a regular basis in the studio?
Well, not all that regularly, but I did, because I wanted to know. I wanted to get to the bottom of it.
And at that stage, what was your knowledge about art, as it were? Were you already collecting at all?
Oh yes.
What sort of things were you?
I'd begun to collect. Yes. I'd only just begun. And really the introduction to abstraction, which I have a natural inclination for, I'm not particularly interested in figurative art, because I don't really like to be told, if you understand what I mean. And so it was Terry Frost who introduced me to abstraction. But in contrast with Alan, he was an ordered, structuring painter. Whereas you can imagine when Alan overthrew all that and just bashed in and see what happens, that was a huge contrast, as well as being revolutionary.
And you mentioned that you were talking in conversation about Buddhism and poetry and music with him, and tell us a little bit more about where these other connections between yourself and what he was interested in.
Well, I mean, lots of the things I was not myself involved in. Zen Buddhism I knew about. In fact, I was I suppose I'd read Zen in the Art of Archery and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Jazz has never been one of my things, but because I knew he made his living as a jazz musician and was highly musical, I was talking to him rather than talking about myself.
Mm. So you were drawn in, and did you obviously knew him, well, just remind us, you knew him over a long period of time, very long period of time.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about your friendship or your knowledge of one another.
Well, he was always very grateful, I think, for being noticed. And I have some correspondence with him, which is quite interesting. When I would write to him about a particular exhibition he was having, and he always appeared to be so self-assured,
right,
so certain of what he was doing. It was quite a revelation to find that, in fact, there were times, and I can quote it at some other time, where he used to feel like giving up the whole bloody business. It was so difficult, and anyway, and so neglected. So it's between indifference.
Was this about how he was being received?
Yes, it was.
Rather than the process itself of getting the paintings out?
Yes, yeah. Oh yes, it was to do with...
So there's that gap between...
He either faced indifference or hostility. I suppose indifference is even worse than hostility.
So how many works of Alan Davie do you now own?
Oh, only half a dozen.
Half a dozen?
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about those different works and when you acquired them?
Well, yes, I can. I mean, the first one, which was 1957, I mean, the book on Alan Davie, done in, I forget what the date was now, but the first Land Humphreys book,
yes.
I already owned it. In 1958, when the exhibition of Davie went from Wakefield to London,
yes,
and really established him. I already owned that painting by that time, which is amazing when I think about it. It was so irresponsible of me, thank goodness, you know.
You're ahead of the time. And what, just because you brought up the Whitechapel you're talking about, you saw the Whitechapel exhibition.
I didn't need to.
You didn't,
because it was
right,
here.
But you'd seen it, the same collection, the same set of work.
It became this wonderful woman called Helen Capp.
Yes.
Great person.
What was your impression of that set of work that was put into the Wakefield Gallery?
I thought it was marvellous because at that time I was already converted and had bought my painting. So I was absolutely all for it. And it amazes me to find that the young Hockley, before he had been to the RCA, saw it and came back and did some Davie-type abstract. I don't know where you knew that. That is amazing. And I've seen them, what he did. I mean, most completely uncharacteristic of Hockley.